Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Masuk Report. I'm Carl Bodner and I'm pleased to be your host. In today's roundtable discussion, 4 panelists will discuss the question that asks, does involvement in athletics lend to improved academic performance? As a teacher, I have often heard arguments that proclaim a direct correlation exists between music and academic performance. However, seldom do we hear that such a correlation exists between athletics and academic performance. In fact, often we hear something quite the opposite, tagged with the phrase jock mentality. Keep in mind that there is a difference between cause and correlation. As we engage our discussion, our 4 panelists today are Mr. Joseph Kabza, principal of Masuk, but also a former student athlete who played for Masuk. Mrs. Laura Massey, a member of our English department, who is also a runner. Senior Dan McCarthy, a student athlete who competes on the boys swim team, and Senior Aaron DeVita, a student who has been a very actively involved member of the Masuk community. As usual, each panelist has agreed to be a lead-off speaker to initiate discussion. Our first question is one to which I would like each of you to respond, but have Aaron be the first respondent. Do you believe there is a direct correlation between athletic involvement and academic success? Aaron, what is your initial thought?
I do believe there is a correlation. I think for my own experiences, for my freshman, sophomore year, I was on the girls soccer team and the girls track team. And then for my junior and senior years, I've worked and done a lot of stuff variously in school. And I think the more I keep busy and sports kind of keeps your head in the game and keeps you focused, I think it really helps you at school because you know after practice you only have a certain amount of time before you want to go to bed and get stuff done. So you really try hard, get your stuff done, and you work and you know that you have a lot of stuff to do. So you just have to keep focused and not kind of fall off.
Mr. Kabza, what are your reflections on that?
I think Aaron hit it right on the head there. You know, when she talked about the thing that she's really talking about is time management, and I think that's a key thing. I know myself when I was younger as a student athlete, I always tended to do better during the seasons when my sports were taking place, and it was a lot of the reason was for that because I knew that I had a set amount of time. I knew there was already time set aside for practice, for meetings for the sport, and all the other things. And I knew I only had a set amount of time to get my work done, so I was much more disciplined. I think back to my college days, and I know I always did better in the fall because I played a fall sport. I played football, and in the spring I always struggled a little bit more. Not that I struggled, but I always knew that I had time in the afternoon, and I kept putting things off. So time management was huge. I'd also definitely agree, just from what I've seen at Masuk, that the majority of our student athletes tend to perform better. They tend to perform better all year long, but even more so during their during their sport. And it kind of correlates to a lot of the research that's out there that indicates that students who are involved, and I think whether it's athletics, extracurricular, anything, if you're involved, students tend to do better, but especially so in athletics.
Mrs. Massey, you're nodding in agreement, I perceive.
I am, absolutely. I can speak as a teacher. I know most of my students who are actively involved in their sports. As long as they're motivated towards their sports, they're usually also motivated towards their academics. And it does tend to slip a little bit as the seasons end or there's a transition between seasons. And I can speak as a sister. My youngest sister was not the best student, the most responsible, but she absolutely, my parents made her participate in a sport each season because that would motivate her to do quite a bit better. As long as she had something that she was working towards, she had a goal, then she could also translate that to her academics.
Dan, do I assume you're also in agreement?
Yes, I am. I think the key aspect that sports help students is they provide structure, and you know each day that you're going to have practice from a certain time slot, and then after that you know that you have to get your studies done after that. So I think that the structure is there during the sport season, which is not there when you're not doing sports. Although you have more time, you don't necessarily have the structure that you do.
But let me be a little bit of an antagonist here. What if I were to argue, but sports can also be a distraction? And when you have a situation where, let's say, basketball season, you're playing 2 games a week, you're playing at night, you're not getting home till 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, you aren't as focused. Anyone think that has a validity to it or not?
I kind of have to disagree because
Okay.
my freshman year when I was on JV soccer, I had to play for the freshman team and the JV team. So sometimes when I did have 2 games a week, I knew that if I got out of practice at 5 and the next 2 nights I had games, I would try to look ahead, see what reading I had to do, see what stuff I had to do, and I try to get it ready ahead of time. Or even on our bus rides home, sometimes on the way home from games, whether we won or not, they would be quiet. I remember I had it with one of the girls in my class. We had reading one night due, and we didn't want to do it by ourselves, so we sat in the corner of the bus and we read the book together. So it kind of helped being around people doing schoolwork, and we were all motivated to just get it done, so we just got it done ahead of time.
So the key thing, then, there has to be that personal sense of commitment or motivation
Right.
to care about yourself, not just as the athlete, but as the student. And that may be the trigger point. Because some students, unfortunately, make a missed decision, I would suggest, and that is they're so focused in that the sport is going to get me to my next step, and they don't put that attention on being the student. So I think the phrase has to receive more attention, student athlete. And coaches have to really be pursuant and supportive of that idea. Let's take a look at our second question. It asks, why has there been a historic tendency to perceive many male student athletes as dumb jocks, or as opposed to the image of the student athlete? You go, Mrs. Massey, what do you think?
I think it has more to do with sort of the historical academic culture. I would say that in past years, there was more of a focus on the male student. If he was athletically talented, there was more of the acceptance that that was his talent and that it was fine to let the academics go. I don't find that to be the case at all nowadays. I think that you're not only admiring the student athlete for their athletic talents, but you're also expecting that they're going to hold up their responsibilities on all ends of the spectrum, definitely including academics. I don't think that it's the culture that we will look at that talented male student athlete and say that that's fine, that's going to get him where he needs to go. I think there's never an acceptance of that, at least here at Masuk. I have not found that to be the case at all. So I think that that's kind of where the pendulum is shifting nowadays, that there is the focus on that whole student athlete spectrum.
Is anyone in agreement? Anyone want to add a comment to that?
I think that the perception of the dumb jock is often sought because of the fact that when a person is very, very talented in an athletic aspect, they're often in the public eye, and they're often seen only for their abilities in that athletic aspect. And you just assume, oh, okay, they're good at basketball, or they're good at football, or they're good at a certain sport. Okay, that's all they're good at. They're not seen when they're studying or when they're taking a test. They're only seen when they're doing that sport.
Do you think the imagery of some professional athletes supports the dumb jock idea, as opposed to being, not just a student athlete, but the intelligent adult athlete?
I definitely think there's definitely a perception in the media, and unfortunately there are certain programs, especially at the collegiate level, where that stereotype is allowed to perpetuate because of poor performance with particular programs. I know, we have a very, very talented, UConn basketball team, but sometimes their rating scores for athletics and academics aren't where we would like to see them. And unfortunately, too, you have, again, perceptions in the media. Just a week or two ago, with the defensive tackle for the Detroit Lions getting up and stomping on another player. Yeah. Doesn't really help our student athletes when that's what the media focuses on, and that was something that was focused on for a while, and it definitely doesn't perpetuate a student athlete. But at Masuk, I think I've always hated the term a dumb jock, because I think it really limits to what a kid is all about and their whole potential and their totality as a person. And I think our kids definitely understand the importance of a good education in combination with a healthy appetite for athletics.
Yeah, another phrase I always hate, because I was a football player myself, is, using it like an excuse if you don't do as well as the expectations are. Oh, he's just a football player. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of, it hurts when they do that to you and you're young. Any comment you care to make?
I agree with everything, and I was also going to take it with the media way, more so with movies and stuff. You see in the older movies and movies played now, schools with, the big football players or the big basketball players, they're never focusing on their schools and stuff. Whenever you see them in the movies, they're always kind of running around in their Letterman jackets, and it's kind of like either bullying someone or just kind of like with the girlfriends and everything. They don't really ever focus on the academics, so I think that could also be where it started coming from in older generations, and it just kind of like carried through with the media, and people still use it sometimes. But
And that imagery gets entrenched.
right.
And you're so right, Aaron, because I think about some of the, I enjoy football. Some of my least favorite movies of all time are football movies. I hate Varsity Blues.
Yeah.
I hated The Program. I hate movies like that just stereotype athletes in that kind of manner. And you're right, there are those images are there.
Well, now let's move to our third question. Dr. Douglas Hartman, of the University of Minnesota argues that athletic participation and academic performance can vary depending upon the type of sport, level of participation, background of the student involved, and the relation between athletic program and the curriculum. Is this a statement with which you agree, Dan?
I think that it's very true, and something that you touched on prior to this is the fact that if a program makes the student so involved to a point in which they cannot study, I think it does hinder their effect. And I think that a main focus and something that needs to have more focus on it actually is the coach. I think that the coach is a very, very integral part of what the student and how the student will perform while doing that sport. I know that from my experience on a swim team, my coach every year gets the same speech on the first day of school, first day of practice, saying, "You're a student athlete. Student is first." And he often checks our grades, and when we have report cards come out and progress reports, he has a meeting with each of us and talks about our grades, and he gives me a kick in the butt sometimes when I need it to step up academically. And I think that that's something that helps the student athlete and gives something a support system.
Anyone have a comment of agreement or question?
I would totally agree with that. I would say as a teacher, I have had so much support from all coaches in all sport areas. If there's ever an issue with the student, the coaches are always seeking out. They're asking the teachers for their input as to what's happening with the student. If you have an issue, whether it's with behavior or academics, you can go to the coach, and there's always support on the coach's end in terms of the athlete's performance on the field or in the pool. I've had such a fabulous experience with all coaches here at Masuk, and I think that is key, and I think that translates to the collegiate level. I think that translates that the program itself has got to value academics, and that has to be kind of part of their culture and their institution and part of their values. It has to be the student athlete, not just the athletic program at the expense of everything else.
Seems like you're suggesting then that the philosophy that the school operates off of is very key and crucial to this, if there's going to be a positive correlation between these two variables. Anyone else have a comment they want to make?
I do agree. I think it does have to do a lot on the program and the coaches, like Dan was saying, and it has to do also a lot on the student too. Like we were saying, it's a student athlete. They really have to want the grades and want to be an athlete. They have to want both, and if the program from when they start off is always about grades and pushing them, they probably won't tend to fall away from their schoolwork. If it was a program that wasn't like that, it was kind of like, oh, well, we have practice, if you have that test, just kind of tell your teacher you have practice and just kind of go through it and we'll find you extra help. Then they would get used to it, but good programs really produce good student athletes, I think.
Mr. Cobbs, would you comment, please, if you could, about the program that our athletic director and basketball coach, John DeGennaro, is doing with the season captains? He's having those meetings. Not many of us are familiar that that's going on and what the cornerstone of that is all about. Do you have a reflection you can share?
Yeah, I think we always look at our student athletes and then especially our captains even more so as leaders in our building. And so what Coach DeGennaro has been doing is he's been meeting with all of the captains from all of our varsity teams and going over different aspects of leadership. And they attend leadership conferences. They go to the CIAC Leadership Conference, our league, the SWC Leadership leadership conference. A big focus of it is on being role models for their peers in their classes. Their peers on their teams, because that's the first kids that a sophomore, a freshman, or a sophomore is going to look up to are the captains on their team. And if they're being student athletes, if they're being leaders in the building, they're going to develop the kind of climate that we want here at Masuk, academically and socially.
Sounds like it should be a program that should be statewide. I mean, it's a very positive experience,
Absolutely.
Maybe someday we'll see it be that way. There are certain mandates that make no sense to me, but this seems like a mandate that would make sense to me. One final proposition to consider is prompted by the work of Francois Trudeau and Roy Shepard. They argue that constructive physical activities such as athletics and performance training have positive influences on concentration, memory, and classroom behavior. The key is competent providers. This can allow for reduction in time from other subjects without the risk of hindering student academic achievement. Is this something with which you can agree, Mr. Cobson?
Absolutely. Last year, before the start of the 10-11 school year, as a staff, we read the book Brain Rules, and I think one of the most, one of the biggest hindrances to learning is stress. People that are stressed out don't learn well. They put up barriers to protect themselves from the stress, and it impacts learning. To me, probably one of the biggest barriers for breaking down stress is physical activity. And I speak from, I can speak for myself, and I know Miss Massey enjoys running. I enjoy running as well, and to me, that is such a cathartic release to be able to go out and to do that and to reduce that stress. And I think physical activity gives people just that, whether it's strength and conditioning training, running, swimming, any kind of physical activity gives you that mental release. And then then allows your body and your brain to perform. It's research. It allows your body and your brain to perform better. And it doesn't have to be that you need to spend more time. So yeah, you take a little bit less time away to do that stuff, but your gains that you're getting back for pay off well beyond extra time studying perhaps or something like that.
So it's like hitting the refresh button on the computer.
Absolutely.
Right? Okay. Anyone have a comment that they want to add to that?
Absolutely. I think Mr. Cobson couldn't have said it any better. I think that one thing that I often tell my friends that they don't understand is a lot of days the water is my best friend. And I think that what I mean by that is that after a tough test during the day or something where it didn't go my way, I think that I just get rid of all that stress and all that anger through the water and through swimming. And then although the practice maybe 2.5 hours, once it's 4:30, I can do my schoolwork and everything is just a clean slate instead of having to just keep thinking about that test that didn't go your way or that class that didn't go your way.
And I don't know how you feel, Dan, when you're swimming, or Miss Mass when you're running, but that also gives me time to really self-reflect on what I need to do, how do I need to prepare, all those types of things just kind of come through my head while I'm doing it, but in such a much more relaxed atmosphere that when it is time to then, attack your schoolwork, or for me, my work here, I could attack it with much greater vigor.
Oh, absolutely. I think that although you're doing a physical activity, it still gives you a time to be reflective. And I think that reflection is a key aspect of learning from your mistakes and learning from what you did wrong and being able to become a better person or a better athlete or a better student. So I think that having that time to be reflective is what is key during the sport.
Do you find that to be true for yourself?
I couldn't agree more. I completely agree. If I'm having like a hard day at school or something, instead of going home and just starting my homework, I'll go to the gym or go outside for a run, take my dogs out, just get that hour and a half to just kind of relax, but still, like you were saying, reflect. I can just, while I'm at the gym, I'll be running and I'll just think about the whole day, reflect on everything, what I have to do, and it just kind of gives you relaxation time and you're getting exercise out of it too.
What about you, Mrs. Massey?
Absolutely. Mr. Bodner, I do. It's a stress reliever. As you've all said, you have time to actually have your own thoughts in just a much more relaxed way in your own time. But I also think, and I don't know that we've touched on this yet in our discussion, but participating in sports also gives those students responsibility, and it gives them practice in having a responsibility in a much more social way, and I think that also can translate to academics.
Absolutely.
Maybe the less skilled student, if they're not thinking about their math class or their math properties or their English homework while they're exercising, at least they have a built-in sense of responsibility and time management and task management, which can also translate to academics. Even if they're not actually focusing their energies in that way, I think it's just a natural tendency or a natural consequence of being a part of a team or a part of a sport or even any sort of activity.
And would you complement that by also adding the fact that once you're involved in athletics, you have to start thinking about other people as well?
Absolutely.
You got to
without a
care
doubt.
about these other people. And it gives you that idea that no one accomplishes anything just totally on their own.
Right.
No matter, even if it is in track and field, and you say, well, it's just the individual running. No, when you're preparing, you need each other. You have to support one another, and that sense of other, I think, is crucial. I'm reflecting on what Dan said. My grandmother used to say, your body is your best friend. Learn from it, grow with it, and it will take care of you. And I've always remembered that. So she was quite a smart girl. All right, well, with that final comment, we will have to close this edition of the Masuk Report. My thanks to our 4 panelists, Mr. Cobbs and Mrs. Massey, Aaron DeVito and Dan McCarthy. Thanks also to you, our audience, for taking the time to join us and share in our discussion. As always, we at the Masuk Report hope you found our discussion interesting and informational. Please join us in our next edition, in which our guest panelists will address the question, how soon should we engage young learners with technology-based education? Until then, be well and enjoy the coming holiday. Thank you.
And that's the news you want to know.